Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the delay, the technical projectors and laptops, and then the one person has to get back in to turn on the recording buttons, and for the people at home can watch us. Welcome to the monthly work session. Prior to this, we had a public hearing on an intermunicipal liquor license transfer. We had a brief executive session prior to this meeting on a real estate issue. I'd like everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by our police chief. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just make a note for the minutes that all members of the board are present. We have several presentations, so we'll get right to it. Our first is our pension investment manager's 2019 performance update. We have Mr. Glacken and Mr. Shada from Mr. Glacken from CBIS INR and Mr. Chada from PFM Asset Management. Who's ever gone first, please come up, since you're both together. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Mike Glacken with CBIS INR. We manage half of the police and non-uniform pension funds. We also manage the defined contribution and 457 plan for the participants as well. I want to just quickly go over our performance and then hand it over to Bikram to go over their performance as well. 2019 was a very strong year in the market. So having a charge of 60% equities, 40% fixed income. On the CBIS INR portion, we were up roughly 19.62% for the year. On the police pension, on the non-uniform plan, roughly about the same, up over on that plan, up about 19.55% for the year. The only difference between the two plans was deposits and withdrawals netted out of over the performance. Just give you a quick review of our process. We use all exchange-traded fund index funds from Vanguard and iShares. What we're doing is trying to take the least amount of risk to hit the highest return, given that charge of 60% equities, 40% fixed income. Since our inception, we've outperformed the benchmark mainly by rebalancing. If stocks do better than bonds, we'll take from stocks, buy bonds while they're cheap. Also, we do the same thing with the different asset classes. This year, since we are technically the benchmark, because we really own everything here domestically, overseas, and on the bond side, our performance slightly different than the benchmark here, mainly due to the fact we do own emerging markets and the fact that we were rebalancing out of growth, which was the winning asset class. So overall, we're thrilled with the bounce back from 2018. The target is 8.25%. So if things were to end today, we would have a substantial gain in the investment return for the valuation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bikram. Any questions before I do so?
Nope, I think we're good.
No. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everyone. So just to take a look at performance for PFM's portion of the portfolio. So with CBIS INR managing about 50% of the assets, PFM has the remaining 50%. And really as a complement to CBIS's style of investing, at PFM we employ both active as well as passive managers to invest the assets, and we do look to be dynamic with regard to asset allocation. And when we take a look at performance both across the police plan as well as the non-uniform pension plan, you'll see for the quarter about 5.65% return relative to the benchmark of 5.28, but most importantly, taking a look at the year, 20.45% return versus 20.11%. So some slight outperformance relative to the benchmark. Much of that outperformance really attributed to our overweight to equities. So as Mike had alluded to, 2019 was a very strong year for the markets, really across the board. And so our overweight to equities did help some of the performance there. Also being underweight to fixed income for a period of the year as well. So 2019 really proved to be a successful year for both the police plan and the non-uniform plan. I think importantly, taking a look at page 1.3 in your handouts, really putting dollars and cents to what a 20% return is. Taking a look year to date, so that middle row, March 1st of 2019, if we all recall, we had just really come out of the fourth quarter sell-off, the sell-off from the last quarter of 18, with a balance of about $35 million in the police plan. And as we take a look, net inflows of just over $600,000 across the, both CBIZ and PFM, but a return on investment just shy of $7 million. So that is that 19% return that we're seeing in hard dollar value. And similar for the non-uniform plan, just shy of $6 million. It was about $5.5 million return on investment for the year. But overall, some great results for the portfolio, especially given the market conditions that we saw in 19. And our outlook for 2020 is certainly not 30% returns out of the domestic market, some more muted returns relative to 2019, but certainly we are expecting a strong year overall. Any questions for either Mike or I?
Questions? Any questions? Okay, thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
We're going to go a little bit out of order. Well, the next presentation will be the refunding of the 2014 general obligation bond. Jamie Schlesinger, Bill Richter, and from Reed Smith. Well, Jamie's from PFM, and Mr. Richter's from Reed Smith, LLP.
Great. Well, thank you. Obviously, we had one of my colleagues here a few minutes ago. I work on a different side of the business. I work on the debt side. So ultimately, my goal is to have the lowest rates possible while they're trying to get you the highest rates possible. So we'll try to do that delicate balance here and hopefully save you some money. As you know, usually when we show up, we talk about a couple things, whether that's borrowing for new money for capital projects or refinancing opportunities. Tonight, we're going to talk about the refinancing opportunity for the township. We've been monitoring the series of 2014 for several months. Those bonds were done as the original part of these financings to do this building, or among other things, for the township. That had a 5-year call provision on it, which means that we're allowed to essentially refinance the debt around this time. Interest rates from our world actually hit all-time lows last week. So it's a combination of many things that's driving the market. You probably have noticed your stock portfolios over the last few days have not been as good as you would like. What's been driving that is actually part of the coronavirus. China and the trade and the viewpoint of that market itself has driven people to put their money into quality, like municipal bonds and U.S. treasuries. That's driven down the bond rates dramatically because of that demand. From our purpose, obviously we want to lock in rates at the lowest rate possible, and to do so, we have to go through the process to get there. Step one would be to introduce the ordinance and have the first reading. That's what we're doing tonight. We're hoping to come back in about a month to authorize the actual ordinance and lock in rates within about a week or so after that. We're going to do some things after that, or prior to that, which includes doing the preliminary official statement, going through the rating process, but ultimately we're going to move as quickly as possible because we want to hit this market right now. Based on current market conditions, if we were to refinance this existing debt with the new rates, we would lock in at about a 2.5% interest rate, which would save about $1.2 million net of all costs. Obviously, that's fantastic. Our goal would probably be to take savings over the life of the bonds. So essentially, every year you would generate about $50,000 per year. We want to do that to kind of offset any future borrowings you may do, which keeps the taxes overall down. I think the township is very, very strong from a credit rating standpoint, and we feel that this will provide the most savings as possible because you're taking it over time. Obviously, I have a whole presentation here, but everything really just tells you you're going to save about $1.2 million based on current rates. Timing of this is going to be crucial, and obviously tonight we're going to start the conversation on the legal side and go from there. One thing I should point out, we would be doing this as a parameters ordinance. This is what Bill's been preparing. You might recall from previous financings, what that means is we're essentially going to be introducing the ordinance and approving an ordinance before we price the bonds, which means we have to legally get an authorization to allow for a maximum interest rate, a maximum principal amount, a maximum maturity, and a savings threshold. Those are the things that matter most. We're borrowing about $9-ish million to refinance the debt, but you'll see in the ordinance that we're going to be introducing, it's going to be an $11 million ordinance. We do that because when we sell bonds, we typically do this as a competitive process. And we won't know if there's going to be premium bonds or discount bonds until after the sale. So we want to have as much flexibility as possible when after we get the proposals back, we can adjust the principal payments to fit within the structure that we have. From your perspective, our goal is to get the highest and savings possible with establishing a minimum savings threshold, but also doing this in advance of us pricing the bonds. So you do see some little odd numbers with regard to the high interest rate and the higher principal amount, but understand that it'll look very similar to the numbers that we have in this presentation and the future presentation will do.
Mr. Schlesinger, what is the savings threshold that we're going to set or you're going to recommend for us?
Did we put in the document yet? I'm not sure if we put in 3% or
We didn't put
we might have left it.
threshold in the ordinance, we just said it was for present value savings. You have a debt policy that sets it at 2%.
Yeah. You have a debt, you actually have a debt management policy. So you have a minimum savings of 2% under your debt management policy. Clearly, we're way above that. This would be about 14% based on current market conditions. You have the right to establish whatever you want. We try to keep it within a reason, just in case if the market adjusts a little bit. But certainly, if you feel comfortable with a certain number, whether it's a hard number or a certain percentage, we can certainly build that into the document.
Now, in 2014, when we issued the 2014 bonds, I'm sure I'm on TV somewhere saying how great we did and how wonderful the price was. So now that we're saving $1.2 million, help me keep my job and explain to everybody that rates are now literally almost comical.
Yeah. It's it's a two-headed question. Number one, when you sell bonds, I think I mentioned earlier, you have the either premium bonds or discount bonds. When these bonds priced, these had a little bit of a premium in them, which means your coupons were higher than what your yields were. So it gave you some what we call optionality, which means in 5 years, which we're sitting at today, now we can come out and refinance the debt with the coupons being between 2% and 4%. So overall, your yield was probably pretty strong in 2014. We do have lower interest rates than we did before, but the couponing is what matters. Now, that's kind of an odd answer, but that's the way bonds price is both premium or discount. In this case, this had some premium bonds and how it ultimately was bid out. But if you compare, I think we have it on page 1 or 2.
Right, well, but to follow up with that, it does represent actual savings.
Yes.
Talking about this chart is $1.2 million of actual savings
Yeah.
versus what we're paying in interest on these bonds. Now, whether the interest rate is 2.4 on the coupon, but it's really 2.2 because we got $110 instead of $100 or $105. I mean, I
Right.
remember how that, or it's $90. I forget which direction it goes. But regardless of playing with the price, the coupon versus the amount that we were actually funded, this is straight up our interest. If we keep paying our bonds, the interest check we write for the remaining life of the 14 bonds is about $4.6 million. And if we get bonds at the prices you're projecting, and obviously your projections take into account even this coronavirus and
There's a little
China
conservative, not
difficulties
much.
in the market, we're talking about more like 3.2. So we've got significant, and we've got some cost of issuance.
And more principal, however it turns out. But yes, from a net standpoint, what you'd be paying before to what you're going to be paying after would be close to $1.3 million net.
And we have 14 bonds. When is the next time we could expect to have another redemption on any of the other series that we
Your
have?
next series of bonds actually would be next year. You have the 2016 issue, which was also done with a 5-year call provision. So that has a call date in December of 2021. So we'd be looking at that at that point in time. Yeah, that
Next
you
year,
might-
but really almost 2 years out, 23 months.
It's going to be a little bit farther, yeah, but that was part of the plan from the beginning. We did several different transactions, and we did them as a bank-qualified transaction, which allowed us to have 5-year call provisions, which is something unique in Pennsylvania. Throughout the rest of the country, people don't use 5-year call provisions, but we kind of do it here. This is giving us this flexibility to jump into the market when we can, because at the time, there was no tax reform. You can't do a tax-exempt advance refunding anymore. So now everyone waits to the call date, generally speaking, to do tax-free refundings. Because we have this 5-year call provision, this is giving us this option earlier than we would have done if we would have done a larger transaction over $10 million. So this plan is working out quite well. And I should point out, if there is any future, we're considering other things, if there's any future borrowings, maybe possibly to the library, we're going to consider potentially doing, this is bank qualified, and if there's any future borrowing, we can potentially do that bank qualified as well. That gives us the same flexibilities. So we are thinking about that for this concept.
Right, this doesn't eat up any of our room, any of our
It's
capacity.
going to be a very
for
small
banks.
amount.
Okay.
It's called, too much information, but it's going to be deemed designated, so it may, be about a couple $100,000 worth of bank
Right, okay.
qualification.
As far as what, the $10 million threshold on bank qualification? Yeah.
Yep. So this will work quite well for you. It's good news. Anyone have any other questions?
Any other questions or comments for Mr.?
Bill, did I miss anything?
Bill, if you just would describe to us what the expectations are for the board. We need to do a bond resolution. Will we be doing that in March?
Well, you'll introduce this, this ordinance,
Next week, right?
P6 2020, next week. And then that'll be a first reading, and then the next meeting will, and the,
And then after that second reading, that's when you'll actually go out and issue, that's when you'll,
right.
that's when we'll issue the bonds.
The parameters that he talked about are Exhibit A. The series of 2014 bonds were for this building, storm sewers, and fire apparatus. And like all of these parameters ordinances, the president and vice president are delegated the authority to approve the final details. I mean, if you don't like the deal, then you don't do the deal, so it doesn't. The ordinance authorizes PFM Financial Advisors, his company, to assist the township with a sale of the bonds, and what we've done in the past is what's called an invited sale. It's like a competitive sale. I'll take any other questions about the ordinance.
And just remind everybody, this is, when we do these bonds, we have, the bonds have various maturities. Those maturities tend to match up, whether it's exactly or whether it's approximately, they match up with the projected asset life of what's
Right.
being financed. As I understand, refunding these bonds will not at all change our maturity, our matches of our maturities versus our asset lives.
No, for tax reasons, we're actually trying to shorten the life of the bond issue. So, under state law, your bonds have to mature within the estimated useful life of your projects. These projects were all long-term projects, except the fire equipment, which was, I think we specified 20 years for that. But as long as you have principal that matures within the 20 years.
Right, but this bond issue has principal that matures every year. I mean, it's loaded
Right.
toward the back. We've got maturities every year. We don't have any
Right.
interest on the years.
Correct.
That's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our third presentation is our township engineer, Mr. Pannoni, Dave Pannoni, concerning the Brookline School and the library cost analysis that we requested a few months ago.
Just these two, right? Great.
Is it on here? It should be on here.
You guys all see okay? So if the board remembers, a couple months ago, Dave Berman, Township Manager, and I were tasked with pulling together the facts associated with 3 options regarding the Haverford Township Free Library. So just to give you a little bit teed up of what we did, we, on behalf of the township, Dave and I engaged Bernard Architects, which had merged with Casaccio, so they've been involved in a lot of the project, and they helped to cost some of the work out for us, and I'll go through all that in detail, but just to let you know a little bit of background. So we engaged Bernard to help us cost some of the work out and to look at some of the concepts at Brookline for a new library. We also took the liberty of meeting with Dr. Goldsmith, and then we had some subsequent conversations with one of the board members, Scott Lowe. All very helpful, by the way, great, actually, very productive, to get to the point where we present this matrix that evaluates the 3 options the board was looking at. And you can see in front of you, we listed the 3 options. The first column to the left is to renovate the existing library. The middle column is to tear down the old elementary school at Brookline and build a new library. And the third option is to tear down the library at the Mill Road property, both the existing, the older building and the newer building, and build a new library. So just very briefly, I'll just show a couple of concept drawings just so everybody realizes there's sort of a basis for where we are, and then I'll come right back to the facts and figures. Bernard had pulled together a little concept, it's only concept, of putting a new library at the Arlington Road, Kenmore, Sagamore site. That's the Brookline site. It would be at-grade parking underneath the building with the majority of the building on a second floor. If everybody remembers, here's sort of the concept for the site. We borrowed the same concept and also laid out the same type of idea, which is at the existing property, if we tore everything down and put a modest first floor and a second and third floor above at-grade parking, what could be done at that property too. So that takes us back to our matrix. So I'll just walk through that briefly. If you look at the top row across the top and the first column, the first option is to renovate the existing building. The size of the existing building is 31,300 square feet. It is a 3-story building, and that includes a basement of about 7,800. The next 2 options would both be to build 3,600 square foot buildings, with the new library at Mill Road would be a 3-story building. If it was a Brookline, it would be a 2-story building. Off-street parking, existing library has 17 spaces. The new library, which would be which would be at-grade under building enclosed parking, would be approximately 70 spaces. And if we did the same thing at the Mill Road property, it'd be approximately 38 spaces. Again, remember, the last 2 options are concept designs. All 3 options will require approvals. On the first option, building permits are required. Both the next 2 options will require land development approvals and building permits. Relief, we all know what relief is. Relief is a waiver or a variance from existing ordinances. So they require relief at the existing building. There wouldn't be any relief required. The new library would require zoning relief. And to put a new library at the existing property, we would have to tear down an historic structure, which would require relief, and again, zoning relief for setbacks. Construction, so here's we get to the meat of it. So Bernardin priced out, using a construction management, a construction estimator, priced out to renovate the existing, which again, remember that design had been advanced fairly well, and to build a new library at Brookline based on a concept. And you can see the renovations about $7.837 million. A new library at Brookline is the $20.465, and you can see the square footage numbers. We took some of Bernardin's number there and then applied it to the new library at Mill Road, put a 15% premium on that because it's such a tight site, and came up with the $23.544 million. FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and soft costs, and also that includes a construction contingency. A 10% construction contingency is in that next line, the FF&E line. So you can see all those numbers. It's 40%, the 3.1, 8.1, and then 9.4 million. And just as a footnote, remember that about 500's already been spent on the renovate the existing building. So next line down is demolition. The board's already seen the bids to demolish the existing Brookline School. All in, we figured out it'll be about 600,000. The existing library, while it's certainly a different structure, is again in a tight site. So we put a premium on that to demolish the existing building. Temporary library costs, Phil was nice enough to go over them with us. We updated them a little bit. If we renovate the existing, there's 400,000 to move to a temporary site. Nothing if we put a new library in, and then another 400 if we tear down where we are. We put an allowance in for off-site improvements. Off-site improvements, what would off-site improvements be? We would envision if we put a new library at Brookline, especially enhancing pedestrian access and probably considering some sort of traffic calming in the area. So we put an allowance in there of about 100,000. And then the bottom line, we totaled them all. So you've got the base construction costs, which we had, Bernard was nice enough to assist with, and then retained an estimator, 40% on top of everything. Then we know from each site, we have some demolition, some temporary, and some off-site improvements. And then we come up with the bottom numbers at the bottom, the totals at the bottom, project totals, 11.3 million, 29.4 million, and 34 million. Yes?
First, the renovate existing program, you've got on-site parking of 17. Is there any calculation here of the cost of additional parking?
We do not have a cost in there to increase the parking.
This option, renovate existing.
No.
And 38, new library, knocking down the old library.
Right.
That is incorporating parking within the building?
Yes. Very similar in concept to, and we borrowed the concept on purpose. If you look in the concept at Brookline, you'd have a little bit of first floor and then 70 at-grade spaces. We used the same concept and laid it out and came up with 29 under-building spaces and 9 that would still be outside. And remember to use it. The last two options are conceptual. The first one's been, the design's been advanced.
And 40% contingency, 40%.
FF&E and soft costs, furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Is that based on library-specific data, or, number seems high to it?
Yep, and it seemed a little high to us too, and again, Bernard has been a big help here. One big thing, don't forget that includes a construction contingency at 10%. So, that's a big part of it.
Okay, so then let's call it 6 million.
Yeah, so now take it down to 30%. So you go from 40% down to 30, FF&E, soft costs,
What's our FF&E here?
it was, I believe it was 20%.
What was our square footage? Construction.
Yes. Yep, no, I brought it. I don't know construction, but
sorry.
all in, the total cost, Amy was nice enough to help me out, was about $440 a square foot, all in.
That's why it
Yep.
seems significantly,
Higher.
It does seem high.
Seems
Oh, it is. No, it
25%
does seem it
higher.
is. It is significantly higher. So let me give you a couple things that we talked through Bernard with that. Just a substantive 5, 6, 7% increase every year for the last 5 years in the trades costs. We're just seeing them everywhere. We're seeing them in the site work. You're seeing it more in the trades. The other thing Bernard pointed out, there's a definite premium in construction to put parking spaces under a building. Because now you're taking, it's not quite like building structured parking, but you're taking your parking, you're raising up your first floor, you're parking underneath, and then you're enclosing it. Ventilation, insulation are all that makes more of a premium cost to build the building. So that adds to it. And the technology component of a library is a little more demanding than the technology component of an office building and a police station. So I said the same thing, so wow, that's a big difference. So they're the three macro things. Premium for this type of layout, technology, and probably the biggest thing, well, a big thing is 5+% a year.
Is it possible for you to quantify what the cost of enclosing the parking is?
I can't. I could get that, I could engage Bernard and try to get that, but I can't quantify I can't do that right now.
But it's substantial.
Not de minimis. Yeah, makes a difference.
Did you go to law school?
Is that a compliment, or?
It actually is. Yeah, I meant it as one.
We think
Jim's sitting
not.
there saying that's not a compliment.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't, Larry. It's just, I don't have the ability to tell you that if you're paying 5% more or 45% more, I'd be kidding myself if I told you that. But I do know, I had the same questions you guys did, like, hey, that's a big number. So we did vet that.
So a prop building on the ground, parking elsewhere, whatever that would
Like we
be,
have here, makes a difference.
would be a lot less.
Would be less. Yep. Would be less.
The soft costs are 30% and the contingency, the building,
There's another 10.
okay.
Yep. I kind of, when that hit me, I kind of wish I had thrown it in that way, but we put them on there as 40%. So that's not, when you think about it, FF&E and soft costs ended up being 20% here. At the estimating stage, to be 30% puts it in about the same neighborhood, logical neighborhood, and then the 10% for the construction contingency. Any other questions?
Where did you come up with the 250 a square foot for renovation of the library?
Bernard gave us a number, and they engaged a construction estimator for both those numbers, the 250 and the 560.
Remind me and remind the public who Bernardin is.
Bernard's the architect, and Lee, tell me if I'm saying this wrong. Lee Casaccio was initially engaged by the district and merged with Bernardin. So they've been the architect of record right now. So these concepts, where you can see they're advanced by Bernardin. An architect's for it.
Can you just go down for the public and just marry up the concepts with the schematic?
Sure, the first, there is no drawing for renovation of the existing.
Understand that.
Yep. These three drawings, 7, 8, and 9, are the new library at Brookline concept. And you can see they're nice architectural renderings. And then we just did a sketch plan of the third option, which would be to tear down and construct at the existing site. That heavy dark line is the outline of the existing building and then some. Takes it all the way back to almost the rear property line.
Go back to the rendering.
Sure.
So what's the facade? What materials are used to?
I don't, well, it says stone veneer.
It's all stone veneer?
Well, that's, again, guys, just remember, this is a concept, but it's called out as stone veneer.
So you have the stone veneer in your numbers, or?
And again, it's Bernard's
architect's
numbers, but yes.
So it should be in the numbers?
Yep.
That would be a stone veneer wherever there's not windows.
All right, and it says something on the top floor, EIFC, I'm not even sure. What is it? Drive it, so that'd be drive it on the second floor?
I'm sorry, drive it?
Yep, yeah, you can see the one, it says stone veneer,
On the base, on the first floor?
yep, and then on the far side, not the Kenmore side, Sagamore side, you can see it's called out for stone veneer also. Wish I could point to this, I can't, oh, there it is. See, that calls out stone veneer for first and second floor, and then here it calls that a stone veneer. So it's all the darker shaded,
All
and
the
then the
rest
lighter
is, all
stuff
the
would
rest
be a
is
drive
just
it.
you say drive it, just a
What's a good
slab,
way to
slab.
describe it? Maybe, I don't know if. All right, synthetic stucco.
stucco. So it's just put in like a slab.
It's applied, I
It's
believe
pre-made, prefab.
yeah,
and
it's
been put in.
relatively prefabricated. We did pull out, the estimate does not include, if you look
It'll
on the
be
back.
interesting to see the pictures, so you should bring some life to it, because that's not very appealing. To drive it is not a very appealing look, in my mind.
Yeah, and that's not been vetted through, obviously through the board. Or, so it's, again, it's a concept stage. And these amenities in the back, the terracing and all were not included in the estimate. The two-story building.
The school's taller than the two buildings.
I don't know if you guys want, I don't know if Lee, if you would have a feel for how high it would be at the highest point? There's the 2 stories, but you're right, there are some, especially some rooftops on there. And you got these 2 stories.
Right. I'm just wondering how high that building is, because if you look across the street, at the houses, they look a lot lower. And those are 2-story structures across the street. I think I see Chris's house right there.
What's this stuff, are they?
Just a joke.
Any other questions?
Yeah, can you go back
Sure.
to,
That would be the second floor. And see, first floor 7,900, second floor 28,100. And again, this is a concept that hasn't been.
Right, yeah, it might be worth noting, what we're talking, from when we first talked about building at Brookline, there was talk about dealing with parking, and that one of the ways to deal with the parking was to put it inside the building, basically at the first floor, and cover it.
Exactly.
Not just put the building up on stilts, but have a covered parking area where most of the working space in this library is going to be up on the second floor. So these drawings show a rendering of that within the space we have and with the concepts we have. This is not the design of the library, but it's for people who want to conceptualize what we're talking about. This is a very good example for us to see what a 2-story building that encloses the parking could look like, and certainly capable of being approved. We're not here tonight discussing plans, analyzing plans, and, approving a specific design. We're getting an understanding of the 3 different options, and we're getting an understanding of estimates, and I think there's a lot more questions we're all going to have, not just tonight, about trying to drill down on what those comparisons really are between renovating, building new on the existing site, and building new on the new site. So let me assure members of the public that this is, again, it's really is an aid for us and for everybody to understand what it is we're talking about when we're talking about principally the 2 locations that we're talking about, a library happening. I mean, not speaking for anyone else on the board, but we haven't been pursuing and thinking about putting a library in a 3rd location that up until now is undisclosed. Consideration is a new library at the Brookline School, at the site of the Brookline School, or the existing library. So,
And just to add, because that's a good synopsis, it really lends more credibility to a construction, an estimate at this stage, when there's at least a concept. So that gives a basis for that construction estimate.
okay, so this is the library. The library that we're looking at here is the library in which the library wants. Am I correct? Is this?
It's a library. I think some of our things we wanted to not go into the playing field, so it conserves the field. We wanted to get all the parking on site, which,
See, I understand what you're saying. I understand what went into this, because I was part of this whole thing, but we've been given three options here. Are we, as a board, choosing one of these three options, or we can choose whatever we like? I don't, okay? So there's not just these three options. There's many more options we have. Is that,
We'd have to commission an architect or someone to give us other
Okay.
options.
Well, but it's a fair question. When you say, or anything we like, we've been talking, whatever it looks like, or whatever we build, or whatever we renovate, we still have generally talking about two places.
right?
I don't know if anybody
I
has
don't-
talked
I
about
haven't
it.
heard any other consideration, any other place, just these
Right.
two.
Right. But within those two locations, I think it's still wide open.
Right. Okay. See, I had the same, no,
Ask your question. Actually, I don't think your question was answered. Did you want to know, and do we know whether the library has an opinion on the concepts that have
thing
been?
is this the concept with, because we're really looking at the library to give us an idea of what they need, okay? That's what we've commissioned them to do. And so they've hired an architect and told us that this is what the library that they would like. Am I correct or not?
Yes, that's
Okay.
accurate.
When we get.
We have the president,
Yes, the library, yeah.
Mr.
Come on up.
Phil, if you'd like to come up and, Mr.
I'd love to. By the way, I'm not a doctor, but I'll give you my own prognosis tonight.
You're not Dr. Phil?
No. I do have a JD degree, but I wouldn't go that far. Yeah, number one, thank you for going through this. A couple of things that I think are important in terms of, this is a rendering that was done more to look at scale. It has no usage, and we haven't looked at it and kicked the tires and said, this is how the library would be laid out and so forth. We basically said, based on other studies that we've done, that this is how many square feet we need, or we would like to have. So how it fits in and all that stuff is totally, hasn't been really talked about or anything like that. I think the library's position is that we've always said where we are now is a great location, but we don't have parking. That is the biggest complaint we get. If you've come to the library, you know it's a complaint, and it just hasn't worked. Unfortunately, the renovation as presented, and as we've been going, we're 90% there through our architectural drawings and so forth, doesn't deal with the parking. So in essence, we're spending a good chunk of money and not dealing with the one problem that our citizens have. I do believe that there's solutions, and I think we've got to look at it, and I would ask the board to maybe put the township manager working with the library to look at what can we do at the existing location to get what we would say is a sizable increase in parking, because the library's board position is unless we can get significantly more parking, we would like to be somewhere else, okay? So that's our, and I don't think we're, we've really looked at that, and frankly, we need the help of the township and your experts to help us with that. So I think that's a 1A option also. The other thing I would point out, reluctantly, but I'll point it out because I think we're here to discuss all options, is the reason we have said no to the Brookline School is not being workable because when we looked at it, we couldn't get parking there. And the only way we could get parking there is demolish it and pick it up. And the reason for that is the constraint we had on the playing fields. If you take that constraint away and say, yes, part of those playing fields could be used for parking, then we wouldn't have to elevate the library. We could probably find enough parking there without going to on-street parking, because that's a no-no in that area. We don't want on-street parking because we want to be good neighbors, not bad neighbors. So I would also say that if we wanted to, I don't want to say go back to the drawing boards, but if the commissioners said, okay, maybe some of that playing field space is available. We can put other types of playing fields there or make it a park or whatever. And we can look at, would there be adequate parking using the existing library, knowing that, you know, it's going to cost to bring that up and make it a usable library. We haven't really looked at that. And I'm not saying it would be usable, but we haven't looked at that because of the constraint we had. We couldn't touch the playing fields. So, you know, that's where we're at.
That sounds.
Mr. President, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So so I understand this correctly, you're okay with the present site as long as you get increased parking?
Absolutely, yeah.
Your membership, has it decreased in the last couple of years, or has it increased?
Well, it's probably increased or stayed the same, but we've also done things, you know, we're now online, so people don't have to necessarily come to the library like they used to and so forth. So the way people shop for books or usage is
That's
different.
my point about you being there. People are using it, you're utilizing it.
No question about it, yeah.
Hasn't hindered.
But
What's the biggest library?
we're also serving, I think, a limited portion of the township because of the parking issue. I think for people that live in that area, it's very usable. They walk and so forth. But there's more we can do, and there is on-street parking there. But I think that working with the township, we may be able to change some regulations and so forth, and there may be other places there to secure parking. But since that may, you know, involve some real estate issues, I don't think something you want to talk about, you know,
Well, I mean,
publicly or anything like
you're
that.
talking about
But
18.
all I'm saying is, to spend this money, which we all recognize is significant, and not solve the problem that people care about, I think is problematical.
So,
Yeah,
Bill,
but
can I
you're
ask
talking-
you?
Excuse me, just 1 second. You're talking about $330,000 a spot at $18 million difference. To pick up 53 parking spaces, we could buy a lot of property around the library and put parking there.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd
Yeah.
be a lot less expensive than,
But there's different options, sure.
So how many, Phil, how many spaces would you get at Brookline on location and not have to go use neighboring streets? 70, is it 70 or?
Well, that's what the plan is now. I
70.
mean, if we stayed at the existing,
No, if you went to Brookline,
used the existing building there?
yeah, no, I'm saying build the building, the new building.
Oh,
with the
I
under.
think we're at 70 spots.
70 spots.
So it's significant.
So what do you do if you have an event that draws, 150 people? Where do the extra people park in that, would they park in that neighborhood?
I don't know.
Isn't there more accessible parking, even though it's not right at the existing library? Isn't there more parking in close proximity to the library than there would be at the Brookline School
There-
for
we have-
overflow parking?
We have good parking, on-street parking, particularly when school's not in session. Because if we have a big event and school's not in session, we use the school district's parking at the middle school and the high school. But 17 spots for
Yeah, no, I
normal
know,
thing is tight.
You somehow managed to be the busiest library in Delaware County nonetheless. That's
Nonetheless.
incredible.
Nonetheless.
People still have found a
Which
way
is a
to.
testament to the library.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, but he also said today, a lot of people are using online,
Yeah. Yep.
which is good. I mean, that's the future, that's what
Well,
everybody's doing.
I'm sorry, the other thing we did is we've put 2 book drops, one at the Crec and one at the library, which are getting great usage. So if someone wants to just come, they don't have to come to the library just to return a book. They now have other,
That's good.
yeah, but the
other
library is
options.
no longer book repository. There's a lot of events happening
Lot of
there.
events,
There's a lot
right.
there's maker space now that we're going to
Absolutely.
incorporate into the library.
Absolutely.
There's a lot
Yeah.
of
Children program.
things that we're doing and making it more of a community center
it's a community center,
than a book repository.
Yes.
So I just want to
Right.
clear that up.
yeah.
As far as unusual special events go, every major meeting space in our township deals with the odd, large event that spills into all of our neighborhoods. I've got Chestnut Wall in the center of, the densest neighborhood in all of Haverford Township. Every church in our town has graduations or this ceremony or that ceremony or sacraments or other events that draw, crowds far bigger than the usual footprint of parking around those areas, and you just park, and that's what you do. And folks know it, it's a special night. You're gonna have a routine schedule at the library for events, so I'm assuming that number of 70 spaces that you guys have in this concept is a number of spaces that you're comfortable with that the library needs for not an unusual overflow crowd, but an overflow crowd.
The 17?
The 7.
Oh, the 70, yes, yeah, no.
Like the 17
I
covers
was
your
gonna say, no, that's
staff
not,
and
no, we're
2
not
cars,
comfortable with
and
it.
visitors.
That doesn't
Yeah,
even
don't
take
worry.
care of our
Yeah.
staff to have to park a couple
But
blocks away.
is 70 the magic number? What would
I
be?
think 70 is a good number.
So if the board were to, when we're considering different options, is the option of staying on site, whether it's in a brand-new building or whether it's in a building that's renovated, where you currently are, is a target of 70 spaces what we need to be, and is that something we have to just take as a requirement?
My answer would be, at the existing site, no, we don't need 70. We need more than what we have. But the existing.
You're gonna have to be more specific than that, because 18's more than you have, and this
Right.
one concept says 39, but I don't get the idea that that's enough.
Well, I would say if we could double, where we have, that's better, that's, given everything else, that's fine. We do have a lot of on-street parking, okay? And depending on what's going on, that week or, whatever, I went up there today, I was able to find parking at the, yesterday I had to park on the street and pay for it, okay? If it's a nighttime event, and as long as the high school or the middle school isn't having an event, there's no issue, okay? So it depends where and when, but I think 17, isn't enough. 35, 40 would be a lot better.
Right, but a lot better isn't,
For day-to-day usage, okay?
my biggest concern, just so folks know, my biggest concern is that when this is over, wherever we do it, we immediately regret we didn't do enough, that we didn't put enough parking. If we keep it on the old site, somebody said, well, 35 is okay, and we realized 35 isn't okay, because it's going to be a new library. No matter what, there's going to be a significant lengthy honeymoon where everybody starts coming again, and people, and just like we have with the Y.
Absolutely.
And so, there's no, I don't mean to be, well, I will be emphatic. If we stay on site, I can't imagine that we think 35 spaces is enough to stay on site and invest 10 or 11 or $15 million in a significant renovation, or $30 million build there, and be okay with 35 spaces. That would be.
Let me ask you a question. If we do under renovation, what's the zoning requirement for that square footage of building?
Parking?
Yeah. Because we'd need a variance. If we go back,
It's an existing use, so we're not putting more square
But-
footage in, we're renovating the existing.
no, if we
building.
renovate, we go to 30,000 square feet, more there. And as a guideline, the zoning ordinances give us a guideline where to start for the number of parking spots, I suspect.
You're not gonna be close to meet your zoning ordinance.
I'm just curious what that number is.
Yeah.
He's
You know,
talking about not more than,
Certain amount per square footage, I should remember, but I don't remember, but yeah,
You did.
it's certainly a lot more than 17. Yeah. What you do is you factor in the shared parking.
probably closer to 50 or 70, I would
Yeah,
expect.
I would think, it might even be more than 70, to be honest with you.
I think that,
I just don't remember.
I think the difference is in 70 and 35 is that the community around the library lends itself to the expansion of parking. So when you're having an event, you have those events on Saturdays and you have those events at night when most people are going to go to the library. at those times, spaces at the school and on the street are available in that area as well as around the corner. There's more parking available in that neighborhood. On Sagamore Road in Earlington, there is no parking on the street. Every house has 2 cars parked out front. There's no overflow parking in that area, so you need to have 70.
Right.
When you have an event, there's no place to park.
Let me
that
say,
neighborhood.
well, parking obviously is very important. The other benefit of Brookline, in addition to the parking, it gives us more space, and we would start anew with a new building where we can design it for Library of the Future, which basically no one knows what it's going to look like. So what we want is a building that has enormous flexibility. So as circumstances change over the next decade or 2 decades, we're able to move things around without having to take down stone walls and so forth, which is the issue we have at our current library. I mean, every time you turn a corner, there's, a cost to doing something there. So I think while the location where we are is terrific, I call it part of the educational campus. We've got 2 high school and a middle school right there. It's wonderful. It suffers from the parking, and it doesn't give us the space or the flexibility for the future. Brookline is not a great space. It's a good space. Good location. It's a good location, but not as good. But it gives us more parking and greater flexibility to build what we need for now, for the current, and the future. Scott, anything you want to say or anything? Lee?
Bill,
He's not
just
getting
going
up
back
here.
to the parking at the current site, I'm thinking that the 35 or 40 spot, if you were able to get to that, you're looking at the daytime where seniors may not want to walk as far, or parents with young kids, so that we're making it more accessible to those communities. Would you agree?
Yes.
And during the day, except on the weekend, we're not having big events, so you don't need quite as much parking during the day.
One thing I want to agree with Commissioner Holmes, my concept has always been, you never have enough parking. And the Y is a great example. I mean, you go to Ludington, we think that's a much better, you have as much problem parking at Ludington now because they have senior citizens there and so forth. So you never have enough parking, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have adequate parking. And 17 obviously is not adequate.
You're adequate.
And just pulling into that lot and then finding out that there's not a space there and you got to back out and so forth, people's blood pressure gets pretty high and then they start to park illegally in the fire zone there. So that's certainly something we got to improve.
Just 2 footnotes, and then I have one other question. One is, you don't build any building for maximum, or any facility, you don't build King of Prussia Mall for Black Friday. Right. But I'm looking here at a presentation that the library did in 2015 before you were president, and it relates back to the 1988 comprehensive plan, at which time it was determined that a minimum of 24 additional spaces off-street parking were needed just at that site at that time. So we were talking 40 spaces were the minimum needed back in 1988, and we're still talking about it, 32 years later. And the other question, and I don't know if Ms. Cuthbertson has information, but since we're throwing out numbers, do we have any sense of what the tax impact is on a new library?
I did, Mr. Pannoni did furnish me with the numbers. So if you did the demolish and new build at Brookline for a total of about 29.3. If you remember in the 20 budget that we're in now, we had planned to borrow 10 as a start money for whatever you went on to. So that would be an additional 19.4 borrowing in the future. If we funded that all with tax dollars, it would be approximately a 4.2% increase, which equates to $62 on average annual increase. That would just be for the additional debt service, obviously, not for any operational costs or anything else that we would need additional revenues for.
If we need it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Any other questions from the board? Or Mr. Pannoni or anybody else?
Yeah, it's the same. Hold in.
Thank you, David. Can we clear that screen when you get a chance, Christina? All right, this is the rest of the work session. We have Commissioner Committee updates on the blight properties.
Not really an update, it's,
Okay.
we have an agenda for next week, the proposed, sorry, we have in the agenda for next week, a proposed ordinance that's based on, the Pennsylvania statute, relating to blighted properties. That's the one that we talked about last month that would make more sense. There were two options, and the other really wasn't attuned to communities like ours. It was for areas with what I'll call mass problems.
Are there any questions on that? We did discuss it last month. The new ordinance has been redone to conform with the Pennsylvania. If you have any questions on that,
Yeah,
it's tonight to discuss.
I admit, Commissioner Siegel and Mr. President, I haven't been able to study the ordinance, but if I have any major issues, I'll share them with both of you during the week.
Okay, great.
It's literally word for word almost the state law because that's what it prescribes that we can do. We're very similar. It came from Mr. Burns' office, and
You said this tracks like Marple. I'm in a township closer to ours than in a city with.
Siegel and his committee did put together this ordinance, and it, as he said, it tracks the state law, and it is similar to what Marple has in place.
But this is a work session, let's talk about this a little bit. What is it, how is it going to help us with the properties that we currently have that are blight?
The ordinance allows for a conservatorship to be put in place. You have to petition the court, and under certain circumstances where a house would be, or building, I should say, resident, a building would be considered a blighted property. You could go to the court and have a conservatorship or a conservator appointed. And then there are different avenues that can be explored depending on the condition of the house or the resident or building, as well as the willingness of the owner to participate in revamping the site. So it allows court intervention, the appointment of a conservator, and then all the way from fixing the building to where it becomes livable or inhabitable again, to destroying the property and redeveloping as another site under appropriate circumstances.
Even the properties that are under bank ownership now?
There are requirements, and I can't, let me just take a look at them real quick. So there's like 5 requirements in order to be qualified. One has to do with how long ago the property's been inhabited. One has to do with where it is in terms of the
You mean uninhabited?
uninhabited, yeah. Well,
Jim?
when, what's that?
I think if I've been reading it, and it looks to me like our principal remedies here are that it's much easier for us to go after the owners in an in personam action as well as go after the property with liens and stuff. I didn't see anything in here about seizure. Maybe that was the other ordinance?
I don't know that it's seizure as much as it is that you go in and you petition the court for a conservatorship, and the conservator would then be allowed to come in and they wouldn't actually seize the property. The property would still belong to the owner, and the owner could participate if they felt there has to be notice to the owner.
Jim, which courts you talking about? The district court?
You can go to magisterial court or the Court of Common Pleas under our ordinance. Under the state law, I think it's limited to just the Court of Common Pleas, but I think Mr. Siegel and his committee had put in the Court of Common Pleas or the magisterial court to allow for smaller amounts of liens and that type of thing, which I think is a very good idea.
yeah, it addresses all types of, it gives the township a lot more flexibility to go in with liens. and to address those things directly, which we can't do now. In the agenda materials, what you really want to look at is, what is page, I'm trying to find, it's really on page 35 of the materials. It's the fourth page of the ordinance, and it says we can file what's called an in personam action for continuing violations to correct things, and we can recover equal penalties, et cetera. There is language in there dealing with mortgage lenders. They're actually defined within the state law. So it gives us more remedies than we have now.
Yeah, I think it's important that homeowners and banks realize that the township's not going to stand pat anymore.
Just back to your question, I'm just interested in knowing what would qualify as a blighted property. How do you define a blighted property?
Right by the one on.
I mean, we all,
I just gotta find where it
I
is.
think I know when I see one, but I'm not sure.
Oh, we could
it
probably
would
tell you about certain
qualify.
public properties.
Every
does
neighborhood has a
define it?
couple that
Or how are we
seem to
defining a
be
blighted
blighted,
property?
but
We have a couple things.
By
So
the state law.
Under
We
this.
can't change
Yeah,
it.
but how does the state define it?
yeah, what,
Because we're gonna go by the state, so
So it's all,
So you've got a public nuisance definition.
It's violation.
Which is
Yeah, but it
physical condition or use regarded as a public nuisance at common law or declared by an appropriate official a public nuisance in accordance with our municipal code.
nuisance, is that to say safety hazard, or what's a nuisance?
Jim, is there,
public nuisance, oh, I'm sorry.
it describes a serious violation, but I don't see where it
Where it just,
defines serious.
It's a state law or
defines
code that poses an imminent threat.
A threat to the health and safety of a dwelling,
Okay, that's a
occupants,
nuisance.
surrounding structures, or people
violation.
walking by.
public nuisance is a property which, because of its physical condition or use, is regarded as a public nuisance at common law, or has been
Can it be
declared.
inhabited, or it has to be uninhabited?
Either one.
Neither one.
Doesn't have to be.
Either way.
Yeah. And for a serious violation, it doesn't need to threaten an occupant of the specific dwelling. It just needs to threaten people around it, or even just passersby,
Right.
by our definition of serious violation.
Or occupants in the surrounding area or passersby, yeah.
So, I mean, we've got properties where, shingles are coming off roofs and, they're empty properties. And we can, this gives us more ability to go after the owners, banks that aren't paying attention to it. Sometimes it's, there is special, looks like there's some special consideration for folks who inherit these properties. Sometimes they don't even know about it. Sometimes you've got big fights among families about inheritances. And there is a requirement here to give people an opportunity in those situations to fix things, but it's not forever. They've get given the opportunity to make payments on reasonable terms to correct code violations or enter into a remediation agreement, which is specifically defined in our existing code with a municipality to avoid subjecting either the giver or the receiver of the property for asset attachment, or this is another thing, this empowers us to deny any permits and approvals on other properties that anybody associated with this blighted property owns. So this is a very significant, this gives us the chance basically to cross-pollinate and go, if somebody has several homes in a neighborhood, several homes across the township, and they've got one in particular that they're just letting go, really go to seed, we can prevent them from doing any development or any other work on their other properties until they fix this, deny them permits for changes and things like that. So now, we're not going to deny them the ability to fix those other properties, but to the extent they're trying to improve these properties, increase their rents, run their businesses, this is another thing this is another way to empower us to deal with these properties.
Any other questions on the blight ordinance.
Looking forward
I
to
think,
passing.
yep, it's a significant improvement on what we've had as tools in our
Yeah, if I
arsenal.
could add just one other
Sure.
thing I know we've been talking about this at a lot of different meetings, and we have gone on a pretty aggressive approach with the help of Joe Celia and his office, and my office we've been attending a lot of the hearings and getting, doing some more research on getting to who property owners are. And I think, it's hard to ever say you're 100%. I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape from where we started, right, Joe, with respect to the properties?
Well, every tool we can have at our beck and call is a benefit to the township. So giving us another tool to work with would definitely be a plus for the township. Using the township solicitor to go to hearings with us and then also using them to write letters for us has given us a better grasp on this, and we have a lot more people coming to us and working better with us because of the input from the township solicitor's office. So we feel we have a good handle at this point, but another tool would definitely help us.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I was wondering if the district justices know now how much of a problem this has been and what our residents have been experiencing, going through.
Absolutely. In fact, the district justices have commented that we are working a lot more diligent and they are finding it a lot easier to get things done.
Good. That's what I wanted. Thank you.
We're good. Thanks for your department's help on that too as well.
Thanks, Joe. You always did a great job with that.
Okay, the next item is our police department crime update.
Seriously. Remember these, we can't do anything. Remember that?
Thank you, Commissioner. The Police Department crime update for January of 2020. We had 24 criminal arrests, 4 juvenile arrests, 330 traffic citations were issued, 42 non-traffic citations, and 243 written warnings. Parking tickets, 447 parking tickets were issued by police officers and the parking authority. We had on 1-4, we had a robbery attempt at 149 West Eagle Road, which is on the Pennsy Trail. The victim reported being attacked along a trail. The victim states he was body slammed, and then somebody tried to steal his cell phone. He declined to cooperate, and from our investigation, we feel it was a possibly drug-related issue. We know who the victim is, obviously, and we do know who the person who did the incident also, but the person who was the victim declined prosecution, so we have moved on from that. January 19th, 1200 block of Westchester Pike, the R&S Auto Police responded to the business for a burglary alarm. The owner of the property reports that the computer tower along with a set of customer car keys were missing. The lock was drilled out of the front door. A suspect was developed during the investigation. A warrant was issued, and the suspect was arrested today. Township line at the U-Haul, sometime overnight, unknown suspects gained access to the business and removing cash from the safe. This has happened at other U-Hauls, and it's felt that employees are doing these jobs. We are cooperating with other police departments. No burglary attempts, no aggravated assaults, no sex offenses. Motor vehicle theft at Wilkie Lexus. 2 vehicles were taken by employees. Arrest warrants were completed, and one subject has already turned himself in. Township line at the U-Haul again, reports a vehicle stolen as not being reported as being returned, which is common in U-Hauls throughout the region. We had 11 attempts from vehicles, 500 block of Cumberland Road, police officer on patrol observed a suspect in the vehicle and was taken into custody. A large amount of change was recovered. He has a history of this type of crime, as well as in Lower Merion, and he was just recently released from prison, and he has since been sent back to prison. 200 block of Oxford, 200 block of Belfield, unlocked cars, 700 block of Penfield. Police in the area noticed a light inside of a vehicle. Victim reports $5 and change and a bottle of alcohol removed. 500 block of Oxford, 2 unlocked cars in a driveway, $5 and change. 4 cars in a unit block of Langhorne. Police officer saw a male in one of the cars, chased him, but he took off. We could not find him. Gilmore Road, 2 unlocked cars entered, and 200 block of Walnut on the 26th, another unlocked car was entered. 2 bicycle thefts. Victim reported video footage shown from his front porch depicts a male juvenile walking up to the porch at 11 o'clock at night taking the bicycle, and that's from a Ring camera. So that investigation is ongoing. We had 22 canine usages. Of those, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them are park checks. The canine officers have gone out doing park checks throughout the township looking for drugs because of the complaints of kids or adults using drugs in the park. So we make a concerted effort to do that, and we feel that keep moving with that. We'll keep that, especially as the warm weather is coming, which seems it's going to be here for the rest of the season. So, Steve?
Yeah, Chief, I just want to thank you and your department for being very diligent in this because, you know, residents, we've asked the residents to report issues if they see them, and they're doing it. And your department, as you know, on one of my streets, you obviously arrested someone who was dealing drugs out there. But the parks are now, Westgate Park, we're starting to see that, but you guys have been great in responding. So we want to remind the residents again that if they see something that looks suspicious and they see dealings going on in the parks where cars are coming and going and people are coming in and out of the cars, to contact the police and they will definitely deal with it because we certainly want to stay on top of this as we all know that, you know, what drugs are doing to our community and our children. If it wasn't that bad, we wouldn't have had it. And thank God we have them. So we're still seeing a high rate of, I guess, drug users and overdoses from.
Yes. We had one death over the weekend from a drug overdose.
Over the weekend?
Yes.
Passed? Did he pass or?
Yes,
she passed?
yes, a death.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So once again, I'd remind everybody, which I do every month, to lock your vehicles. Every one of these cars that were broken into were unlocked cars. So,
Thank you, Chief.
thank you.
All right, we're coming to the witching hour in our work session. We have a 90-minute unwritten rule. There are many items on the agenda for next week. The one that we wanted to discuss was the smoking in parks. We have a second reading on that ordinance. We had talked about discussing it at this meeting. There are many other items. We'll get to that, but if anybody has any questions on the other items, I'd ask you to look over those agendas. The rest of the agenda, there's been one change on the purchasing. The last item on the purchases, the two 20-yard dumpsters and the one 40-yard dumpster in the amount of $14,999 has been removed from the agenda. That purchase is either delayed or been put on hold. So at this time, we'll have a discussion on the second reading of the ordinance at your request. We talked about last month when we tabled this, or we actually passed it. And if there's any significant changes, we'll have to redo it, but the floor is open on the smoking ordinance, smoking in parks ordinance.
Mr. President?
Mr. Holmes.
I would need the solicitor's ultimate okay on this, but my thinking is since smoking has never been prohibited before, and we're passing an ordinance that is going to prohibit smoking, that if we were to discuss and decide that we would limit the prohibitions to certain areas of the park, I guess my question to the solicitor, without waiving attorney-client privilege, if he wants to just take the question under advisement, is whether just limiting the enforcement of the ban constitutes a substantial change to the ordinance, or whether, since we're starting at nothing and we'd end with enforcement, would changes that limited as opposed to expanded the prohibitions be something that satisfied our ability to make this a second reading and have the ordinance passed next week?
Yeah, I'd probably rather take that under advisement, take a look at it and see for sure. I mean, you know, yeah, that's my.
Yeah, I know that we've had, and again, I'm not trying to talk you into making a decision on that now, but obviously any discussion we have tonight that would limit the prohibition in ordinance P5 2020, it would be for those folks who feel that this is an issue that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. It may provide some comfort to them to know that this kind of change won't necessarily postpone the implementation of this ban. Obviously, your answer is going to be your answer, and I'm not going to challenge it, but with the assumption that we could reduce the prohibitions that are currently in P5 2020, it's going to be my recommendation, and when the ordinance is moved into consideration next Monday, I will ask that the ordinance be amended to limit smoking to those areas where we are concerned about the exposure to children of the smoke. And I would follow the example we set the last time that we looked at this issue with regard to dogs. And I would suggest that we have similar prohibitions on smoking that would limit the areas of established playgrounds with playground equipment. I would suggest that it be limited to the entire playing area of a basketball court, a tennis court, or a baseball or softball field. That those be areas that we enforce no smoking. But for those larger parks in our area, especially some of our more natural parks that aren't necessarily saturated with or concentrated with specific designed, play equipment, I would suggest we not have blanket prohibitions in those parks. So that's certainly my intent next week. Everybody heard me talk about this last week. There's no reason for me to go over it again, but I would appreciate your advice to us on whether you think that constitutes a substantial change or whether we could make those kinds of changes to the ordinance without requiring a third reading.
I'll get you an answer for that next day or two.
Great, thanks. Just share it with all of us. Mr. McCluskey?
I just, I have no desire to get into an argument about this, but I just think the concept of trying to parse this into certain areas of the park and not is defeating the purpose of what this premise is all about. It started as something from the Pennsylvania Department of Health that came from their Young Lungs at Play initiative. It's now been approved by thousands of municipalities across the Commonwealth. And the initial opposition to this was that we'd have too many signs or that it would be too hard to enforce or it would be too confusing. And now we're at a point where Commissioner Holmes is suggesting actually making it more complicated by divvying up certain parts of the park as for smoking and certain parts as not. And I would say what I said a month ago, that but if you do that, what you're actually doing is saying smoking is, it's like creating a smoking section in a restaurant. We're creating a smoking section in a park. And I just think it's contrary to what the purpose of this ordinance, as suggested by the Pennsylvania Department of Health, was designed to do. And if the concept is we don't want to do it, that's fine. But we either pass it as a ban at smoking in the parks or we don't. I think divvying it up defeats the purpose of what is trying to be achieved. And again, I don't, the number of municipalities, there's 34 in Delaware County already. Like, this is not, we're going to be the outlier. Like, this is not going away. We pass it, we put up a sign, it's protecting, the kids, the parents, anybody who's in our parks, and we move on. So I don't think it's comparable to the dogs.
I think if you're trying to ban the smoke in the park, why did you even give them a spot to even smoke in? Like, I just don't get it. And if you go down to Phillies games, you walk in and it says you cannot smoke here, and they have enforced it there, and there's not even a spot to smoke there, and you get tossed out of the place if you do. I don't see how.
But the idea of the ordinance is to protect health, though. Somebody smoking away from kids is not endangering anybody. So, I mean, I think that's the reason that I understand that everybody else is doing it, but I think you could put signs as you're entering the park saying smoking is prohibited near any ball fields, near any playgrounds, and it would accomplish the same thing.
Any other comments?
I'll leave my comments till next week. I don't want to. I find this discussion just unusual. Smoking is something that is banned virtually everywhere in public. We now want to say it's okay to smoke and leave your cigarette butts in that part of the park, but not another. And it's okay because if you smoke over there, it's not going to bother me who's allergic. I'm going to leave it for now. I'll rant next week.
So I'll rant. To answer the original question, Mr. McCluskey, you say I'm creating smoking areas. I say you're creating no smoking areas. You say tomato. I say tomato.
Oh, I am. I'm
Throw
creating
the whole thing off.
no smoking area in the whole park.
No complaint came from anybody in the township. Nothing came to the park board. The police have never been asked to intervene on any kind of situation involving smokers at our parks. None of this comes from anywhere. Our park board.
I've had the problem, and I have said it, but I guess I don't count. Come on.
Dan, you're up here. We listen to what people say, and we listen to what our constituents say. But our police didn't ask to do this ordinance. Our park board, although not unanimous, did say that they didn't support this ordinance. It's only a 5-4, it's only a 5-4 vote. So we can say there's no compromise. It's out and it's out. But I would suggest that you'll get a 9-0 vote next week if we decide to have some kind of reasonable restrictions on smoking, but not say that it's an outright ban in the 34 parks. And actually, you raised a good point, Mr. Siegel. There are fewer and fewer places where anybody can smoke. We live in a very, very densely packed township. Now, there are a couple of wards where people can go out into very large backyards and they can have a smoke. In the 6th Ward, my average lot is 1/10 of an acre. And if I can go to Elwell Field and it's 14 acres and I can sit 500 yards from the nearest next person, the idea that that I will commit a crime if I light up a smoke or light up a cigar or light up a pipe, it's already against the law to dump your cigarette butts anywhere. It's already against the law to be a jerk. I just don't think that we need to have a prohibition on every square inch of township property for smoking when nobody in the township asked for it. And so, it is typically our role when we have, when we're debating this and when we have, I don't want to say a fierce debate because it's not fierce, but there's honest disagreement on both sides of this issue. And so I didn't lead off by saying next week I'll be voting against this ordinance. I suggested that next week I will suggest some compromise language that I think is easy to find. And I also think it's much easier to enforce for the police if they just know it's this area, and that's where complaints are going to be concentrated from. So, nobody has to consider the amendment next week. I'm just letting everybody know that I will be proposing it. And I think in the nature of compromise, it is something we've done before, and I think it's something we certainly ought to consider taking up in the future. So I don't know if that qualifies for a rant. I think it's just an answer to some of the issues that were raised.
I will concur with what you're saying, Commissioner Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Tremilio.
I mean, there's no doubt, look, smoking is bad for you. Everybody knows that. The federal government hasn't banned cigarettes. People smoke still, unfortunately. But in the parks that I know of, and I've been in the parks with some events, and people know not to smoke near children. They're not doing it. And for someone who's, as Commissioner Holmes has said, I think the last meeting, someone who's at night, 9:30 at night, walking their dog far away from any field and has a stogie or something, I mean, it's, nobody's there, but if somebody sees them, they're going to call the police. Let the federal government ban cigarettes. They won't do it.
Any other comments, Doug?
No.
Any other comments or questions on any of the other items on the agenda for next week?
I had one, Bill.
Yeah, Mr. Lewis, go ahead.
Yeah, it relates to ordinance RP 8, 2020, Stadium Cafe lease renewal. has a provision in there, in that lease agreement, where we, as the landlord, are responsible for taxes, and Amy's still here? So I assume, is there a portion of that building that, because it's used for-profit purposes or commercial purposes, is taxable, is taxed?
No, we're not paying tax at all on that building, but just in the event, we have that clause in some of our other leases, just if the Board of Assessment would ever come along and deem a portion of it to be a taxable space now, that would be the responsibility of the tenant or reimburse us.
Because the way it reads in the lease, the way I read it, was that we would be responsible for the taxes.
We would be responsible as the owner. I can double check to see if there's reimbursement language in there.
Yeah.
Because
I think
typically that's how it
there
would
was
happen.
leasehold improvements, I think it kicks in, they're responsible for that, but not the actual. So.
It's highly unlikely in this situation.
Okay, I just didn't think any of our properties were taxable, but I thought
They are not,
that
and they are
might be because it's a for-profit venture. So it's really, it's not.
We'll double check and check it out.
Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you, Ms. Cuthbert.
I have something too, Bill.
Go ahead, Dr.
On
Hart.
the closing of Caricong, I've had a lot of requests to extend it. We're closing it at the end of April to November 1st, and the weather's nicer for a more prolonged period, that if we could move it up a couple of weeks in April and go back a couple of weeks in November.
Pick a date.
Okay, and, well, and there's another request here too. They also, on two holidays, the 4th of July and Thanksgiving, that we would close it.
Can we talk about that a little bit after?
Yeah.
Okay.
What, I'm sorry, did we get any answer to that? Does the lease?
She's going to check the language and get back to us. Any other questions on items for next week? There being,
Our expectation that we will rule on the liquor license.
Almost got it in.
yes, if you look at your agenda, it's liquor license transfer is there.
You could go turn off the lights over there.
So yes, that is on the agenda for next week. It's Resolution 2171. Anything else?
Was it adjourned?
We stand adjourned.